Be Your Spirit, a guide to happiness and self-realization based on the Yoga Sutras. Cognitive errors of childhood. According to rational emotive behavioral therapy, there are certain styles of thinking that are more likely to produce negative emotional reactions. Coincidentally, the styles of thinking identified in rational emotional behavioral therapy are characteristic of cognitive errors that are made by children between the ages of 2 and 7 years of age. Examining the cognitive errors of early childhood provides insight into the dynamics of negative thinking. The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget pioneered the study of human cognitive development. Piaget believed that the human intellect develops across a series of stages that correspond with the growth of the brain. The brain's capacity to process mental information increases as the brain grows over the first 16 years of life. Each stage of intellectual development is characterized by both limitations and advances in the processing of mental information. Early childhood mental functions are limited and prone to erroneous conclusions. The intellectual limitations of early childhood are characterized by self-centeredness and the use of overly simplistic logic. Piaget identified 3 mental limitations that occur in early childhood. These are egocentrism, centration, and conservation. Egocentrism is the tendency to only view a situation from your own perspective. A classic psychological experiment conducted by Piaget and the Swiss developmental psychologist Barbel Inhelder illustrates the point. The study looked at cognitive differences between 2.5 and 3-year-olds. In the experiment, known as the 3-mountain problem, a child is seated at a table. On top of the table are 3 objects resembling mountains. A doll is placed in a chair on the other side of the table, facing the child. The child is then shown 3 different pictures of mountains on the table and asked which one represents the doll's point of view. The 2.5-year-olds consistently identify their own point of view rather than that of the doll. In contrast, the 3-year-olds were more likely to identify the doll's perspective correctly. The inability to imagine another person's perspective is referred to as egocentrism. The younger children in this experiment could not reorganize spatial information enough in their memory to imagine the doll's point of view. Centration. In early childhood, the use of categories tends to focus on one aspect of a situation while excluding all others. Piaget called this narrowing of categorization centration. Centration refers to the child's rigid use of language to label and identify aspects of their world. For example, a centrating child may not agree that all lions are cats. The child believes that lions are not cats because she has narrowly identified the category of cat in reference to her own pet kitty. Another example of centration is when a child is unable to recognize that her father is also a son and perhaps a brother. In this case, centration limits her ability to understand that an object, her father, can exist in 2 categories at the same time. The centrating child has an absolutist perspective that relies upon an either-or form of logic. Either it is a lion or a cat. Either he is a father or a brother. The lack of conservation. Conservation pertains to understanding that an object retains or conserves its essential qualities even though one aspect of its appearance may have changed. A child who lacks conservation will misinterpret the quality or quantity of an object. the lack of conservation is a form of centration in that it involves reaching a mistaken conclusion by overly focusing on one aspect of an event. A classic example of a lack of conservation involves presenting a child with 2 glasses of water. Each glass is equal in size and contains the same amount of water. The water in one glass is then poured into a new, differently shaped glass that is much taller and narrow. If a child is asked which glass has more water, she will choose the tall, narrow one. The child chooses the tall glass because it appears to have more water. In this case, the child does not conserve the amount of water through the transition from one container to another. Another example of a lack of conservation involves presenting a child with 2 equally sized balls of clay. One of the balls of clay is then flattened out into a large pancake. If the child is asked which piece of clay is larger, the child will choose the flattened ball, even though she saw they were both of equal size in the beginning. Types of negative thinking. The cognitive errors of early childhood involve rigid mental categories, all-or-nothing thinking, and the narrowing of focus. Egocentrism is a tendency to view a situation only from your own perspective. Centration involves a narrow use of meaning or definition in relation to categorization. In conservation, there is a narrowing of focus upon one aspect of an object, which leads to erroneous conclusions. The cognitive errors of childhood are often referred to as concrete because they are characterized by rigidity and single-mindedness. Concrete thinking uses either-or logic, which views the world as primarily unchanging. From a concrete perspective, the world is either all good or all bad. When change occurs, it is a sudden movement from one polar opposite to the other. Concreteness is an overarching dynamic in negative thinking.